I'd like to join others in thanking those who organized this conference on food safety and health diet, and also my brother who has just made a call to all those who believe and who have a faith to join in this journey. This session is for faith leaders or interfaith leaders. And for me, I believe that each human being has a faith in whatever one believes in. So everybody is really faithful in something. And as we know, the subject that has really held us for these last 2 days has been the safety of food and those healthy diets. And for those who speak French, we have been trying to translate food safety into French, but it does not match. We always talk about la sécurité alimentaire. That covers food security and access to that food which is safe and which will be also nutritious for our bodies. The issue of faith and food has always been together since the beginning of life. As we read from the Bible, read from other scriptures, that a human being does not only exist or live by bread, but needs that aspect of spirituality that brings in the dignity of humanity and brings in also the ethical side of our actions. I've been listening, this being my first participation in such a conference. I've been in Rome for just 1 year, as we have been representing the Archbishop of Canterbury to the Holy See, but also being the director of the Anglican Center in Rome. 2 words have been repeated many times. One is change, that everybody recognizes that things are changing and have been changing, and that we cannot continue working as business as usual. Our way of working and our way of seeing things has to change also. The second word that came many times from all who spoke was collaboration. That no one, be it a larger organization or even a government, can bring change alone. We have to work together so that what our goals may be reached and be sustainable. I come from Burundi, and my short intervention will be on Africa. What is the perspective of all these changes as Africa is concerned, as food security in Africa is concerned? And I would like to mention it in bringing the collaboration, the working together with what we call the smallholders farmers. Because if we meet as representing international organizations or industry or research institutions, we cannot forget the farmers who produce more, almost 80% of the food we consume or the food we eat. In Africa, we call them small farmers. But when you add all those small farms, they constitute almost 80% of the portion that produce the food we eat. So they are not really as small as such. So in our collaboration, in our deliberations, we have to take them into account. I also talk about Africa because in all the data that we have, Africa is seen as a predominantly a continent in deficit. It is mainly mentioned where crises are, drought, poverty and diseases, famine. But there is also the other side of Africa, that are people who are courageous and working hard to see that their lives are sustainable. Despite the increasing trend of urbanization throughout Africa, the majority of the continent's population still live in rural areas and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. This means that life for the vast majority of the African population is characterized, as I said, by smallholders for subsistence agriculture and a high vulnerability to poverty, underdevelopment, and food insecurity. Therefore, when talking about food safety or food security in Africa, the first challenge is the land that we are using. The second challenge will also be water. The third will be whether the food we cultivate is for cash crops or food consumption. And when I talk about food consumption, the next challenge will be the gender issue. Because in the family composition, the cash crops most of the times is the responsibility of the male. They sell, and most of the times the produce of that production is controlled by male. The women mainly produce for the family and for the well-being of the children and so on. So that issue also, when we are talking about food security, has to be addressed, of how do we keep the well-being of the family in a sustainable way. So my first point was to raise up this question of who are the people producing what we are consuming, and in Africa, they are the smallholders. The second point is the agendas. We have been talking about 2030 agenda. The African Union, and we have our friend who is working in Addis, has just produced an agenda for 2063, which will meet with the time when African Union will be 100 years, I think, old. The two agendas of the Sustainable Development Goals, which it should normally reach its purpose and goals in 12 years' time, and I doubt we shall be able to do it, or it will be like the Millennium Development Goals again, have the same objectives as the 2063 African Union goals: to see Africa free of poverty and free of want, especially food and hunger. But this will need collaboration. This will need a strategic program to bring all our efforts together so that the productivity may be of a needed level. But talking in terms of productivity, Africa's average fertilizers use 11 kilos per hectare, as compared to 167 kilos per hectare for other developing regions, and 250 kilograms per hectare for Asia, which means there is a deficit in the use of fertilizers. And the continent continues to suffer from serious soil nutrition depletion, including primarily from soil and water erosion and nutrition leaching. The soils of many African countries are among the most degraded in the world, with about 20% of Africa's agricultural lands seriously degraded, while up to 75% of farmland is vulnerable to erosion and soil depletion. In the area of nutrition, 1 in 4 undernourished people in the world live in Africa, where the number of undernourished people has consistently increased over the last several decades. Since the early 70s, Africa has increasingly turned into a net food importer and is currently importing nearly a quarter of her food needs. Reasons for this scenario are many and vary from country to country. However, common issues include high population growth, low and declining agricultural productivity, policy distortions, weak institutions, and poor infrastructure. Indeed, for Africa, food safety is a matter of national security that calls for urgent measures for reducing food insecurity and malnutrition. Religions, therefore, in Africa is very important, not only for food safety, but for development in general. And I would like to conclude by mentioning 3 areas that I feel our collaboration and that the international community, institutions, and all those who are concerned with food security should work with religious organizations, churches, institutions in Africa where I know better. One is the word we have already used and recognized, the power of education in changing the culture of the way we work. We reckon in Africa 60% of institutions, educational institutions, are in the hands of religious organizations, be it Christians, Muslim, Jewish, or other religious organizations. So those are tools and instruments that can be used to change the mentality and what I have called the culture of our eating. The religious bodies have the power and the capacity of mobilizing the population and sharing the information. The second area that we could really work out and see, it's the power, the efficiency of proximity. I talked about smallholders. In every village, in every community, there is a representation of religious bodies. So the proximity, whoever says I'm from a religious group, lives with those communities. So we know how they feel, how they feed, and what can be done if the knowledge is given to those religious institutions. We can engage with smallholders or small farmers. The third area is the issue of sustainability and what I have called accountability. All the agendas, be it Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 or the African Agenda of 2063, talk about the dignity of human being. They talk also about environment and creation. But the challenge for the moment is our individual and collective responsibility as far as caring for creation, caring for nature is concerned. Listening to our presentations here, for me, I felt that it was a scandal that 1.3 billion tons of food is a waste, when a population of more than 800 and something million people spend a day on one meal a day. And I know some families that sometimes do not get even that one meal a day. So when we talk about the waste, whether it's because of the deterioration of the food, or whether that food has not been consumed, I think it's a challenge for us, a challenge that the whole world should be addressing and using properly in a better way. That's what I called the collective responsibility of using what God has given us and what is there for the human use. Collaboration, so that the change that we are experiencing may be beneficial to humanity. And thank you.